Well, this morning we may get to chapter 21. Well, I hope to get to chapter 21 of 1 Kings, so you can kind of find your way there. But to begin with this morning, because I want you to get, again, try to keep in mind the context of the stories that we're going through, as the authors recorded these little snippets of stuff that he thought were significant, but they take place in the context of what's going on in the world in those days. And for me, it's real easy as I read this stuff to kind of get just tunnel vision, and you start thinking that this is the whole world. It's kind of like living in Bickleton. You know, pretty soon you think the whole world revolves around this little place on the hill, and you forget that, you know, there are other people in the world. So this morning, for a little while here, I want you to back way off and realize that there's a whole world of stuff going on, and I'm gonna spare you, because I can't pronounce them either, all the names and all this sort of thing, but I want to get you kind of in the idea, the big picture of what's happening in the world, and the world that Ahab is living in. So you'll have some idea of exactly what kind of pressures he's facing, and maybe you'll understand a little better what's going on with him. So we've got our world map up here, and for a lot of the population at that time, this is the center, at least, of the world, if not the whole world. Obviously, there's a lot. You can go clear to China. There's stuff going on in Asia at that time. And there's stuff in India that's happening, and there are people all over the civilizations that are going on. But I want to take you back probably before 1600 BC at least, and start working our way back up, because we're around in the 800s. And so as you go back, you find that there are kind of several areas of civilization, and it's like this moving map of pressure that goes back and forth of who's in charge of what in this area. So, of course, here is, you know, kind of the place we always center on, the Tigris-Euphrates river valleys, where a lot of civilization began, and because agriculture is possible there and some things like that, that things develop and big cities develop. So that's one of the areas in the world where that happens. Within this area, we always think of Babylon being here, Assyria up here, and, you know, kind of isolating them. And what you find out when you go back a ways, it's really interesting, because we know Abraham came out of where? Ur of the Chaldees, and Ur of the Chaldees is down here. And so he actually comes from there. Assyria comes out of this civilization, as does Babylon. A lot of them come out of that. So we've got this one area where a whole lot of folks come out of it and then spread from there. Down here is the other power center. Again, a river delta in an agricultural area and a center of civilization and of great wealth. And so you have the Egyptians with the pharaohs and all that sort of thing going on. And so you have this power center and this power center over here that's kind of split in two as you go along. And then you get over here and you get into where the Greeks come from. And what's really interesting when you go back far enough is you find there's some ways that people settled that lend themselves to empires beginning to grow, and some that don't. And one of the just kind of side note things I found really interesting, you do not see any of the Greek influence really getting going until you get all the way up to Alexander the Great. And you go, why not? They had a lot of stuff going. A lot of things that we think of come from Greek culture and from all that Greek stuff. Well, it's because the Greeks were very independent city-states. A lot of little bitty broken up countries, if you will, ruled by one little guy, and they didn't get along very well, and they couldn't agree on anything. Sound familiar? They just couldn't agree on anything. They never could coalesce into something that amounted to any kind of a force outside of their own little area. So everything kind of pushed up to them here, but nothing came back until you see Alexander much later. And by that time, all the city-states had broken down, and he was able to gather a bigger force. What we've had happen is out of here, we've had this back and forth between kind of more the what we think of Babylon here and Assyria up here have been in this tug of war back and forth for hundreds of years. And while that was happening, some of the great Egyptian pharaohs whose tombs and sarcophagi and things you are familiar with seeing have exerted their influence, and this area here is always in play because it's the freeway, right? It's the place to everywhere. It's also a good agricultural land that flows with milk and honey, right? So it's been an attractive place everybody's wanting because it's in between these two great power centers. And as you go through the centuries, you see this ebb and flow of Egypt has come up all the way up into here. We actually have influence of Egypt, and the pharaohs were collecting tribute from folks up in there, and they've got some letters called, I think it's the Amarna letters, they found in tombs in Egypt. They're written back and forth. Yeah, I see somebody back there going like this. It's warm up here too. I don't know. Next thing that's going to happen when they get cold. It's all hot air. I'm sorry. So what I'm trying to help you see, or I want you to see, is that these things have been shifting back and forth. And why that's important is because where they are in flux at the time that we're studying here. And what's happened is just before that, Egypt was the power up here. We have these letters about them. And then Egypt ran into troubles at home. And the pharaohs started, there were battles within, and the pharaohs between dynasties, things had all gone to pot. They lost their power and lost their influence and the ability to go and have this far-flung universe of control. But it's an interesting thing that shows you just about how they kind of reached the limits of their ability to stretch out. While they were taking tribute from these guys, guess which language all of their correspondence was in? It wasn't the Egyptian language. The writing is all in the cuneiform from Assyria and Babylon. So they had to, even though they exerted some control of some sort, the communications happened in this language, not that one. So it's really interesting what the dynamic must have been, that they were out there, but they were right on the edge of their ability to be the guys in charge. And that started to break down, and you see them kind of folding back down. And about the time they folded back down, you think, oh man, we'll see Assyria and Babylon go up, and they'll just go charging down in here, and they'll be the ones taking influence. And then there's this funny group called the Hittites that we've read about. And the Hittites pop up right here, modern-day Syria. And the Hittites pop up, and they were significant. They never were huge, but do you remember what they had? They're up in the mountains, very rich in minerals and things like that. They figured out how to make iron. And that's what the Philistines later, remember the sea peoples that came down through? And all of a sudden, the Hittites just disappear off the face of history. They almost vanish overnight in terms of history. So they have been there, been this powerful influence up there that held everybody in check. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And it's about the same time the Philistines show up down here, and they believe that they came from here down through, took those out, and then went down to Egypt. And you'll read from the Egyptians about this great battle and how they managed to, of course they make it sound glorious, they just got by the skin of their teeth, and they beat them down here in a big battle and put the Philistines back in their place. They ended up back up in Canaan. So we've had this big tug of war. As we come to this passage, everybody has been in kind of decline. Assyria and Babylon have gone back and forth. Assyria was more dominant. They crumble. They have battles. And Babylon comes in, and they're more prominent. And they've just been this back and forth and back and forth. And you can read about the ones from Assyria that came down to Babylon, stole their gods, Marduk and some others, Ishtar, and took their gods, the symbols of their gods, and packed them off up north. And then how the Babylonian guys got even and went back and found them and brought them back down and built a temple for them in the south. And it's really crazy how all these different kings and these dynasties that they have they actually track them. It's amazing the amount of stuff they have. There's a reason for that, which is kind of interesting. In Egypt, it's papyrus that was the writing and recording material. Seems to have been the one that they have a lot of. Up here they had a little bit of stuff like that, but not so much. The thing they had up here, clay tablets. You've seen the little tablet about the size of your hand, 2.5 inches wide, 6 inches long, with the little cuneiform, the little triangle-shaped little markings all over them. And they would take them and either bake them in the sun or the oven. They're almost indestructible. And they found this library of tons of these things that were preserved, thousands of them, up in here in Assyria. And that's how they can track all these dynasties of kings back and forth. It's all recorded there. So you're all going, this is painfully boring. It is, unless you're a politician in Israel. And if you're Ahab right now, this guy up here has taken over. There's a king that took over, and he has managed to, these guys are having trouble down here, and they are in disarray, and he is beginning to put his influence out. The Hittites are now gone. They are an interesting people because if you're down here in Fat City, and you can irrigate, and you grow crops, and everything's good, and there's not too many, you got desert on both sides, and not a whole lot of competition. You can just be happy, grow your crops, and focus on agriculture, and developing your cities, and all that sort of thing, and everything's fine. If you live up here, you got, right on the river you can grow crops, but outside of that, there's some desolate country. It's tough to make a living, and not only that, there's mountains up here, and towards the Caspian, there's some ornery folks live in the mountains up there. And it's even harder to make a living, so the way you do it when you live up here is you raid these guys down here. And they, for hundreds of years, have fought the battle between the Hittites over here and these folks up here, and it's just been constant having to fend off the enemies. And so their culture develops around defense and military and all that sort of thing. And you get a little taste of military victory and of the kings getting praise for their victory over all the enemies that are coming in. And instead of having a culture that's just agricultural and build a big city and we're all happy down here, you get a culture that's Assyria. I was going through looking at pictures of Assyria stuff on the web. It's interesting, some of the paintings or whatever you want to call them that have survived, of them skinning their captives alive, of them burning out their eyes and putting hooks in their noses. Shows a guy with a bunch of strings with all these captives with a ring in their nose and a line on it. I mean, they were ruthless. Absolutely make your skin crawl thinking of the things that these Assyrians would do. They were notorious across the known world for, if they come, you are in deep trouble. And that's the climate of which they were in, and they grew up in that, and they developed in that, and so warlike is an understatement. So these guys are now flexing their muscles, and just previous to that, remember we talked about they made a drive up through here. They got all the way to the Mediterranean in their first push to the west, because there's nowhere to go over here. You can't go east, there's nothing out there, a bunch of little tribes and troublemakers, but there's nothing to be gained over there significant for building a civilization. But over here, it's the freeway. Over here is the Mediterranean. Over here is wealth. That's where you're going to go. And down here is Egypt. And you've had to serve Egypt before, but you wouldn't mind changing things over to come your way. So here's what's going on. Is Ahab's sitting there as he's fighting these battles. He's got between here and Ahab over here, he's got Aram right there, Syria. That's what's his buffer right now. And he's battling. We just saw the battle over this last chapter. And remember, he could have killed the king. If we go back up to verse 34, where we have Ben-Hadad, and he's cutting him a deal. You know, the cities which my father took from your father I'll restore, and you will make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father made in Samaria. And Ahab said, aha, I'll let you go with that deal. And he made a covenant with him and let him go. And we're trying to understand, why would he let his enemy, this guy he was supposed to kill, and God said, they're under the ban, take them all. And he didn't follow through. Why? You know, what logic in it? Well, one, we talked about last time, Ahab's person and his character, what's he like? Oh man, he's the big shot now. He's important. Wow, he's got this king under his thumb. What's the other reason, I think? These guys. He's the buffer zone. And if you cut a deal, keep him in power, keep his country out there, get some influence, get some things cut, work out a deal here, then you have a buffer between you and the growing rumblings coming out of Assyria that were coming down. So what you have is a guy that's trying to find a political solution to his dilemma. And then it starts sounding much more like today. We don't have to trust God. We can figure it out. We're rich. We have a system. We've got things going on. So life is good. We've got it all figured out. And as we've said before, when you think about Israel, you usually, when you read the scriptures, you think of a country that's a total mess because they have walked away from their faith and they've walked away from God, and their religion is just a mess. And it is. But their economy and all that is doing very well. And they're cutting deals all over, and they show up. And all these, if you start reading these historical fragments that they have of these involvements with these other countries, they were out cutting deals, and sometimes they went bad, and sometimes they went good. But they were out there trying to figure it out, and you actually don't see near as many, there's really a few references to Judah, but there are a lot more references to Humri, or which would be Omri. The Omri dynasty impacted the other nations much more. So here we have Ahab. As you come to chapter 1, that's the world he's living in. Ahab is under the gun. He's cut this deal with up there to have trade with Damascus, and he's worked out a deal there. He's all dejected because the prophet came and told him, because you cut that deal and you didn't trust God to take care of you, it's going to be bad. I'm trading lives. I'm taking yours instead of his. So he goes home, remember, it says he went to his house sullen and vexed and came to Samaria. He went home bent out of shape, because he thought he'd done this great deal, and this Omri prophet came by and put his finger on his chest and said, eh. So he went home pouting. And it came about after these things in chapter 21 that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab king of Samaria. And you go, wait a minute, it said he went back to Samaria, which is, let's see, do we have a smaller map, Kathy? I'll catch you in the middle of something, I'm sure. Is there one that's more local there so we can get an eye on that? There we go. Samaria, this is, of course, this is during the time of Christ, but the world didn't move, just the lines. So Samaria was down here, and there we go. And so the capital would have been somewhere in here. And now the story picks up 21. We are up in the Jezreel Valley, which is up here, just south of Galilee, south and west there, somewhere right in there. And you go, wait a minute, what happened? Well, some time has elapsed, and everybody's pretty convinced that this is his summer palace. Remember, we're in the temperate zone. They actually have winter, and they have summer here. And during the summertime, when it's hot out in the desert, or up in the capital of Samaria is not nearly as pleasant place to be. It's nice down in the valley, next to the river, agricultural area. So he probably had his summer palace there. So we're some time back. We're in the summertime, and Ahab is kicking around the palace with nothing to do, and he's looking out his window and going, man, that would make a lovely garden out there. We could grow vegetables. I don't know, maybe he had a green thumb, and that's how he got away from the pressure of the world. He liked to go out and putter in the garden. I'm not certain. It never tells us why he wanted this garden, but he looks out on this piece of property and says, that would be great. So he goes down, here's the deal maker, and he offers this guy a really good deal. Into verse 2. And Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it's close by my house, it's right next door here, and I will give you a better vineyard than it in its place, if you like. I will give you the price of it in money, whatever you want. Now, who could argue with a deal like that? You take your little old kind of rundown vineyard, and I will take you up there on Andrew's farm, and I'll buy you a chunk of the latest, bestest varieties in the primo location, and I'll trade you straight across. What do you think? Well, that doesn't go. How about cash? What's it worth? Hey, I'll give you 1.5 times, twice what it's worth. You know, give you a really good deal. Surely he'll go for that, right? See, he's really being generous. And Naboth says, verse 3, I'm sorry, Ahab. The Lord forbid me that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. And you go, what? I don't get that. And that's it. That's the answer. Well, what's the inheritance of my fathers?
Well, they were never supposed to sell their land. The tribes and the people, when they were given land, they were never supposed to sell it.
Remember when they moved in and they took the land way back in the time of Joshua? And they divvied everybody's section up. You know, some of this shows you a little bit of it, but so it was all divvied up, and this one tribe would have had that piece of land as their tribe's ownership. And among that tribe then, all the families would divvy up the little pieces of property, and you could never sell it. The most you could do was rent it up until the year of Jubilee. And so every 7 years was the year of Jubilee, so you could rent it if it was 3 years or 4 years or whatever, and at the end of that period, it reverted back to the original owner. And he took his land, but you could not sell it, because God says it's mine. You can't sell my land, and I gave it to your family, and you've got to keep it. I think it's about Leviticus 23, somewhere 25, somewhere in there, and then it's again in Numbers. Don't sell the land, and you can't take it from someone. It's theirs. So he said, you know, it doesn't matter whether I want to or not, I can't do it.
Are these two from the same tribe, Ahab and
I don't know for sure whether Ahab would have come from that same, or he could have.
Well, Ahab was an Arab.
That's what the song said, anyway. Yeah. So I don't know, he could have been, but it wouldn't have mattered because it wasn't his family.
There's nowhere that says where Ahab is.
You know, it probably isn't. I have missed it.
Well, and
he's the son of, you know, yes. So Omri. So I have to go back and find out what Omri's from, which tribe it is, and then of course we got to find out, well, Naboth. So could have been the same tribe, but still, if you're not the same family.
But Ahab should have known the history of the land and known the laws. He thought it was okay because it was him.
Yeah, he should have known. As soon as this guy said, he should have gone, oh, silly me. Yeah.
Well, he knows, but he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Because he really doesn't have any relationship with God anyway, and so what's
the big deal? Yeah. I'm going to give you a better inheritance anyway. What the heck? Yeah. Yeah. I just, you know, why quibble over these little things? You don't have to bring God into this. So that's the answer. And Ahab goes, well, man, can I rent it for a couple years? So can't we work out something so you keep it? So, you know, Ahab being the, you know, great leader that he is, comes to verse 4. And he came into his house. This seems to be his, as the same words as in verse 43, sullen and vexed, because the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he came home and was kind of bent out of shape. And it says, he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and ate no food. This is the king of Israel. Being very mature, handling this really well. He went home, laid down in his bed, turned his face to the wall, and told his servants, buzz off. I'm ticked. Now you would expect that of somebody that's 6, right? That's how you do it. Pout. I didn't get what I want. But you don't expect this as the king of Israel. So it's real insight into the heart of this guy. But here he is under all this pressure. Here's the guy that's dealing with Assyria. That's dealing, making these international deals that just not too many months or maybe a year before was the guy with his foot, if you will, on the neck of the king of Syria, or at least the great general, and he just beat him. And here he is, laying there with his face to the wall, pouting. You go, Lord, what kind of guy is this? But then, fortunately for Ahab, he has this wonderful, understanding wife. She is such a sweetheart. Verse 5, Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, how is it that your spirit is so sullen that you're not eating food? Can't you just hear that? What's the matter with you, Ahab? What do you mean you're not eating food? What is this? And he says, here's Ahab, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it pleases you, I'll give you another vineyard in its place. And he said, I won't give it to you. Well, am I going to eat? How can I eat at a time like this? Turn me down. I love her answer. There's a little steel in the voice. Jezebel, his wife, said to him, verse 7, do you now reign over Israel? Oh, did you catch that? Irony in there a little. Excuse me, Ahab. Are you the king? What is your problem, man? Are you the king? What kind of ruler are you? Oh boy, I can just hear the disdain in her voice. That must have been a really interesting relationship. At some point she said, I don't know how Dad got me into this deal. But he hooked me up with a real loop. This guy's an idiot. I mean, he got all those priests of Baal killed and all this sort of thing, and it's just one thing after another. And now this piddly little thing. And this is, oh man, this woman ought to give you chills down your back. And she says, you get up and eat bread and let your heart be joyful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. I'll get it. No problem.
Not that this matters or anything, but I kind of picture her as being a little more sympathetic, or not sympathetic, but more like the serpent in the garden. Just, oh, did God really say that? I mean, you know, there's sarcasm in it, but with her, aren't you the king of Israel? I guess, to me, I could just see her sitting on his bed just petting him, trying to get her own way.
Could be.
Well, my Bible says, is this how you act as king over Israel? So it's a whole different way of thinking.
Yeah, that's basically what she's saying. Yeah, aren't you the king? What's your problem? Yeah. What's your problem? You're the king. You can have what you want. I mean, kings were absolute rulers, right? And so, I wouldn't be surprised if he was a little worried about her. And while you're reading this and all, remember that she has a daughter that's watching. Because that's going to get really interesting later down the road. We're a few chapters away from seeing that. But she has a beautiful young daughter that's watching all this. And she learned really, really well how to follow mom. So,
Well, it's just a soap opera.
It is a soap. This is, you know, if you didn't know better, you'd think they took this right out of a soap opera. So she says, come on, you go, I'll take care of it. And she went down and she called in the scribe. In verse 9, she wrote verse 8, I'm sorry. She wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal. So she's got a seal with his name on it, stamped it right on there, official. Comes straight from the king. And sent letters to the elders and the nobles who were living with Naboth in his city. So she went to his town, sent it out to all the political leaders that call the shots in his town. How'd you like to get that letter? Ooh, you get a letter. It's got this official stamp on it from the king. Only you know how the palace runs, right? And you know Ahab, and you know Jezebel. It doesn't say that they went, oh, this is Jez. I'll bet they knew it. Because if it had been Ahab, they'd probably gone, another thing from the king. And here's how they dealt with that. She wrote in the letters saying this, proclaim a fast and seat Naboth at the head of the people. And seat 2 worthless men before him and let them testify against him, saying, you curse God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. You know, what? What is all this? Well, first of all, proclaim a fast. Why would you do that? What's a fast? When they had a fast. So you don't eat, right?
Religious.
Fasting, sackcloth and ashes and all that sort of thing. What's that symbol of? Mourning. Something bad has happened. A grievous thing has happened. Oh man, declare a fast. We have had a tragedy among us. It is bad, everyone. There's an official fast, and we've got to get to the bottom of this. Serious offense has occurred. And you're going to bring Naboth in and you seat him. It says, you seat him, where did it say? At the head of the people. He's right up front and center. Now that doesn't mean the head, oh, isn't he wonderful? He's our salvation. It means that's the guy. Remember Achan, who took stuff, was under the ban when they moved into the land, and God was unhappy with them? Think same process. Here's the guy. But in order for you to convict someone of something, you have to have, the law says, 2 witnesses. We will see this a few years later, quite a few, as our Lord is brought in for trial. And what did they bring in? 2 witnesses said, yeah, I saw him. I heard him say. And that's exactly what they do. Bring in 2 upstanding citizens, as she says. Worthless men. Guys that can be bought. And have them testify against you. You curse God and the king. Notice the king and God are considered one and the same. If you curse the king, you've cursed God. It's all the same penalty. We got to deal with this.
So you're saying that Naboth knew then, probably, when he was seated at the head of this.
He knew something was up. He would have known. Yeah, it's like a judicial proceeding. This is an official government proceeding, and we are dealing with this man who is out blaspheming God. That's what it's saying. He has done something to blaspheme God. It's like they accused Christ, said, I am God, and they said, that's blasphemy. Except that when it's true, it's not. And they brought somebody in that would say, this guy says he's, no. And so this guy's come in and he said something against God and the king, and it's worthy of the death penalty. We're supposed to purge that from among us.
When Naboth said no to Ahab in the first place, that says a lot about him. He knew when he said no.
He said, yeah, and his no wasn't anything personal. It's came, I cannot do that. This is a faithful guy that says, this is my father's inheritance. It came from God. And it's interesting. Notice the situation we're in. How convenient it is to use the law to get rid of this guy Do you know what also is considered blasphemy and worthy of this? Bringing idols in and worshiping idols instead of the true God was to be dealt with by taking them out and stoning them. Where does this take place? Israel. Who's driving it? Jezebel. What has Jezebel brought to Israel? Idols. Big time. Does she care one whit about the law? Could care less. But she'll use it. She'll use it. And so it's interesting that those who should have been stoned because they brought idolatry into the nation, should have been dealt with, are the ones that are twisting this law to their own benefit. And she's going to have these guys, and they are going to go, yes ma'am, because they'll be next if they don't do it. And the fear of what the world's going to do to them through Jezebel causes them to move. And then she says, you take them out and fulfill what you're supposed to do. So that's what they did in verse 11. The men of his city, the elders and the nobles who lived in his city did as Jezebel had sent word to them, just as it was written in the letters which she had sent them. Did you get that? Every little thing, the way she said it, boy, we didn't miss nothing. We made sure we got it right. And they proclaimed a fast. And they put Naboth at the head of the people. And these two worthless men came in verse 13 and sat before him. And the worthless men testified against him, even against Naboth, before the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. And they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. Do you know how brazen those two guys had to be? Who threw the first rock?
Oh, the person who makes the accusation.
The accusers.
Why do they have to have worthless men? That's sort of interesting that these guys had to be worthless. Like, okay, do you take a test to show?
How
Because it
worthless
seems
were
to me all those kings are sort of worthless too.
Yeah. The key is then, what kind of people do you need to find? What they have to do is perjure themselves. They have to be willing to come in and lie in the official court system, if you will. They have to be willing, and they've got to be willing to the point they're going to throw the first rock. Those who are witnesses who come in and make the accusation have to throw the first stones. You got to follow through. No saying, it's him, go do it. No, I personally am going to be in there pitching rocks, and I know it's not true. So the emphasis here in the writer, I think, is telling us, these are people that are evil men. These are men that don't care. They'll do anything for a buck, or anything to get good with the queen. It's frightening, really. They will sell their souls, if you will, to the devil, and that's what they do. And they came in, they said it, they took him outside the city, and they stoned him to death with stones, and they fired a word back to Jezebel saying, notice where they sent it? That's why I say, they got it, they knew it wasn't Ahab. I don't know how they knew, but they knew. They sent word back to Jezebel saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And when she got word that Jezebel heard Naboth had been stoned and was dead, that Jezebel said to Ahab, get up, arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth, the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, but dead. No problem now. Now that he's dead, all those issues are gone. No more have to worry about passing it down to fathers and all that sort of thing. And your brain, probably part of you, somebody might be out there thinking, well, didn't he have kids? Didn't he have family? Was there somebody else that could inherit that land? What it doesn't tell you here, but if you go further into 2 Kings, what you will find, they took them all. What happened to Achan's family when Achan took things that were in the ban? Took the whole tribe. Men, women, children, everybody. If you brought idolatry into the land, you cleaned out everybody that might be connected with it, you took the whole family. they took Naboth's whole family. There were no heirs when he walked in here. And you go, wow, craziness.
And one thing I get from hearing all this is that these people live through hard times, and we're living through hard times. They survive, we'll survive.
Yeah, there's hope if you can survive this kind of evil. This is the state of the country, and we're out of time, so we're going to leave ourselves hanging here with Ahab going, oh, I can go down and get my guards. That shows you where things have gone in this place and where the king is gone. And you go, how in the world does God still keep them around? Why has he let this go? And you'll be more amazed when you see what happens with this guy Ahab. You'll be really shocked. I am, in a way. And especially in the light of our last Sunday's message and our Men of Steel message yesterday and everything, where it talks about sin and the fact that we're all born into this thing called sin and we all pack it with us. And I was telling the guys yesterday, I just struggle sometimes when I catch even the tiniest glimpse of God's holiness and what his character is like and how he cannot approach sin or have it approach him in any way, shape, or form at all. Because he's, light and any bit of darkness can't approach him at all. And yet, he found an answer in the Savior in this time that we celebrate to come and solve the sin problem that was there and extend grace to us who he couldn't even approach. Blows me away. And not only that, but he planned it from eternity past. And there's that Christmas song or poem, I'm trying to remember which it is now, maybe it's both, that says, knowing what it would cost, he created man anyway. Doesn't that just boggle your mind? He knew it would cost his son. And I don't know if we can ever comprehend what it was he endured.
But don't let anyone tell you that the whole reason he went through the cross was because he just loved us. Because he did it for his glory.
He did it for his glory, right? I mean, because...
We did it for him, for his glory.
Yeah, it's...
Yes, he loved us, but that's not why he went through the cross.
Because God glorifies himself,
Yeah.
But when you look at this guy, Ahab, just do me a favor and hold up a mirror. Because he's acting out what's really in the heart of man. And maybe none of us have gone out and thrown rocks and killed anybody physically, but a lot of us have killed people in other ways. Some of us have even just thought it, because the Lord said, the law says that if you do this, that you're worthy of death. I'm telling you, if you even think in your brain, you fool of your brother, that you've already killed him and you're guilty, just like everybody else. He's trying to get us to understand how terrible sin is and how deep it's seeped into our bones. So when you look at this guy, you really have to realize this is God's grace dealing with all of us. That's what you see in this picture.
Well, he didn't kill him.
What's that?
He didn't kill him.
Oh, no. Hands were off. Yeah, he didn't have anything to do with it. We didn't stop it. And he could have. Yeah.
Well,
And
and
we'll
obviously
see,
that really fair, because when it says she tells him that Naboth is dead, he just got out of bed and went to...
Well, how did that happen? Must have been the plague went through, right?
Oh, okay.
Son of a gun. I wonder how we missed it
Now I
during
did
the
what I
palace.
wanted. Yeah.
Well, we'll pick it up next time, and it's a little tough on some of these to see the wherewith and the what if, and I hope I haven't bored you too much with all the history around, but this guy Ahab's a fascinating look at human nature, and as he deals with the pressure of the world around him and how the choices that he makes are fascinating. But I hope you just keep your eye on the grace of God in this. Just as you look at this nation, you look at the state they're in, you wonder why he held Assyria back. Why did he wait so long? Because, man, they were bad. And he waits. And he waits. And he'll even wait on this guy. I mean, read ahead. Cheat a little bit. Read ahead. Look what God does with this guy. And you go, how can you do that? It's amazing. They're backing up on the back.
Well, the interesting thing is, you read the paper and see what's going on in the Middle East. You read the Old Testament and you see what went on in the Middle East.
Gosh, we've been here before. Spurgeon says the little ones are climbing the walls out there. We got to. Let's close. Father, we thank you for our time together this morning, and help us not to get lost in this interesting soap opera of a story. Indeed, let us see and understand, and maybe even identify a little bit with the motives of the individuals in the story. But God, would you focus us even more on your grace, on your provision for mankind, on your long suffering with your people, and help us to appreciate that grace which has been extended to us. Those who are completely outside of the covenant that you've reached out to through your people, through your chosen ones and through your covenant, and you have extended your grace to the whole world, and we all are included, and we thank you for that. Father, help us as we go through this holiday season to gain even greater appreciation for your sending of the one who would be God with us, that would come to pay the price for our sin. Father, just give us ears to hear from your word today as we hear it revealed. Help us to understand the great challenge, the things that you overcame to provide our salvation. For we thank you in Jesus' name.